and welcome to Incorruptible Mass. Our mission here is to help us all transform state politics. We know that we could have a state and a legislature that truly represents the needs of the vast majority of the residents who live here. And on that note, we are today going to talk about city revenue, city and town revenue. We're going to compare what we are able to do in Massachusetts with what cities and towns can do in other states. We are going to be talking about all the things that the state legislature, state laws in Massachusetts prevent us from doing in terms of raising money. We're going to talk about how it affects us. We'll talk a little bit about Prop 2.5. And also, at the end, we will talk a little bit about the state legislature, the power of the speaker, and why their reason for not allowing us to raise revenue in other ways is all about the power of the speaker. We know our listeners love to hear it, and we love to talk about it. But before we do, I am going to have my co-hosts introduce themselves. I will start with Jordan.
Jordan Burke Powers, he, him. I am, who am I? I have many years working in Massachusetts politics, and I am a resident of Worcester, and so we will talk a little bit about that and our city budgets.
Fantastic. And Jonathan?
Jonathan Cohn, he, him, his. I've worked on different progressive electoral and issue campaigns in Massachusetts for a little over a decade. I am in Boston typically. I'm joining now from Cambridge, walking home. Just quick joke, Jordan, when you were like, wait, who am I? I was like, we should do something where we each actually introduce another person on the show.
I like it. At this point, we know each other so well. Fantastic. And I am Anna Callahan, she, her, coming at you from Medford. Been doing, a lot of issue and electoral stuff for a while. Done a lot of local politics, sort of training folks around the country. I'm currently a city councilor in Medford, Massachusetts. So I think a lot about our revenue streams as a city because, hey, we don't have enough money for anything. So I'm excited about this conversation. And I think I'm going to talk a lot today. So Jordan, do you want to just talk a little bit about this article from Mass Live that introduces this topic that's kind of a good kickoff point?
Yeah, so just, I think the easiest thing to remember is that your town's budgets are not the same as your state budgets and they're not the same as your federal budgets. That's actually important. I know it seems obvious, but a lot of people don't actually know that. And so the city budget comes from several places, right? It needs to get its money in. And so normal places get money from a variety of taxes, property taxes, other types of taxes, and then they usually get a little bit of money from the federal government, maybe, and then the state government, and some other sort of side ways to have revenue to pay for things like schools, other things that really matter in our towns. And so there was an article in Mass Live about property taxes making up 70% of Boston's budget. That is a bonkers town amount of like a level of the budget for Boston. So that means that almost all of the revenue it's allowed to generate is from a regressive taxation system of taxing people for their land value, which then gets passed down to renters, to homeowners with rising, regardless of other things. And we do some things to try to make that a little bit better at the edges. But if you also want to know, like, why is the rent so high? This is also another big part, is just the lack of ability of our towns to set reasonable tax policies and revenue policies to get a sort of fair mixture. So the article points out that Boston is not typical at all, that it's up at 71%, 70%. New York property taxes make up 29%. Nearly 30%. Washington, D.C. property taxes make up 21.7%. Los Angeles, 34.6% of their revenue. And across the United States, property taxes make up 18%. 18%
on average.
So that imbalance sort of sets a lot about like what is happening here in Massachusetts.
Yeah. And I'm going to dig a little bit. I was so fascinated by this article. So I dug into the numbers behind some of the, you dig into the links and they get to these, pages that have national statistics. And this is for cities that are over 10,000 people. So this is not just the giant, million person New Yorks and Los Angeles, right? This is for towns like Medford, right? 60,000. Anything above 10,000, the average amount of revenue, percentage of revenue that comes in for property tax, as Jordan said, is 18%. The largest revenue is actually from user fees. And this includes things like, water and sewer, electric and gas, transit, like you have your own bus line, tuition, highway tolls. Like if you own your own universities, parks and recreation programs that you charge for. So that's the largest percent, that's 29%. 18% is property taxes. 14% is what they call other. It's like special assessments, selling property, interest earnings, rents, royalties, lottery. 13% comes from state funds. And then 8% from income tax and 7% from sales tax. So there's a lot of what they call it's a diverse revenue stream. And this is what in this article they were talking about. The Boston city councilors were like, hey, we got to diversify. This is bad because we're also looking at commercial real estate having something of a crash in a city like Boston, where it is becoming less and less valuable now that so many people post-COVID are working from their homes. So that whole commercial property tax base might have a crash, and then the revenue of Boston City is going to be wildly affected since it's like 71% of the revenue of the city. And I'm just going to I ran the numbers for Medford. Medford is very much like Boston. 72% of our revenues from property tax, 17% is from the state, and 9% is from local receipts. That's things like vehicle excise tax, hotels, meals, payment in lieu of taxes, that kind of stuff. Jonathan, I know you are fascinated by this topic, and I just want to tag you in.
Yes, and what's particularly enraging in Massachusetts with this example, which you kind of teed up before, is how cities and towns in Massachusetts are also more restricted than elsewhere about actually diversifying their revenue bases. So that because in Massachusetts, because of the system of home rule that we have that limits the ability of cities and towns to pass their own laws, they aren't technically allowed to pass new taxes. They basically have to, if they want to pass a new tax, they have to find a way of basically dressing it up and calling it a fee.
Right.
Because you can pass a fee, but you can't pass a tax. So you have to come up with your way of saying that your tax is actually a fee, but then you still need the state to approve it.
Yep.
And so if you don't want to deal with the hassle of doing all of the work of lobbying the state legislature to allow you to raise money to meet the needs of your city or town, you end up having to either fall within existing constraints and simply do less, or in many cities and towns, you have to do what's called an override because of Proposition 2.5, passed during the anti-tax years in the 80s, that severely limits the ability of municipalities to even raise more from property taxes. When property taxes are already too much of a share, but cities and towns are also fairly constrained in how they can increase their ability to raise money on the largest foundation of their taxing power.
Absolutely. And we're limited. We can't tax anything else, but we also can't raise that. Jordan?
I was going to say, Anna, I know you're working on this right now.
Oh, yeah. So Medford is one of the only, a handful, maybe, I don't remember, 20 or something out of 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts that has never even put a Prop 2.5 or debt exclusion on the ballot ever. We've never allowed the voters to make this decision for themselves. And to me, that is crazy, right? Because really, what is democracy about, except for the most democratic thing you could do would be to put it on the ballot and let people decide. We also are a wildly underfunded city. We just compared to other cities, we rank 330 320, sorry, 320 out of 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts in terms of our spending per capita. And all those other 31 are way smaller than we are. So there are no cities that spend as little as we do per capita. So we are, in desperate need. And I do want to mention about this Prop 2.5 thing. I want to stop us and have us have a little bit of a conversation about Prop 2.5. Even the proponents of Prop 2.5 at the time, they weren't saying we're passing Prop 2.5 so that no city will ever do this, right? They hoped that cities would put it on the ballot and allow their residents to make this decision. This was not something that you weren't supposed to do. We have people in our town who are like, let's make sure we never have to do this again. I mean, that's not the point.
And it's also very striking across when you look at other cities, as you noted, where a number of other cities have income taxes, and income taxes are always far more progressive than property taxes are. Given just how unequal on an income basis we are as a country, and the ability to raise money from countless different sources. And it's always fascinating whenever you see some debate over a new tax that a city is considering. And you're like, that debate itself wouldn't even be possible here in Massachusetts because of how much work it would take to get the legislature to even allow that.
Yeah.
One thing is, Jordan, go, and then I'll go with another point.
No, you go with another point. I was gonna.
No, because I want to look up something that I have something to look up to complete my
okay,
point.
So I'll just say really quickly. That the other piece that I think is a good reminder about this is that this also reflects, again, like a lot of things in America, America's racism also feeds into a lot of this problem. So the reason that our towns have such big budgets is education. And one of the ways that we pay for education is through property taxes. And the decision to pay for education through property taxes was a decision to ensure that Black children never get the same equal opportunity to education. Its heart, the heart of this system, is a desire to ensure an unequal funding stream so that Black children will never get the same education as white children. And in fact, some radical Republicans after the Civil War, they had a bill to make the federal government
Republicans, by the way, this is when Republicans were the ones who were
fighting slavery, right? And they wanted, well, you'll know that this is different because they wanted to tax people. So they wanted to have a large scale tax and then collect that money for the federal government and disperse that equally across the country directly to schools. And there was similar efforts in Massachusetts for the state to collect all the money together and then have a formula to equally distribute. The work that we did, the really important work that we did in Massachusetts to create a dedicated revenue stream that ensures larger funding for our school districts is in fact the best thing we've done on racial justice in a long time. And I will remind her that the state legislature did it kicking and screaming, still has yet barely funded, and needed us to pass a tax on millionaires to do it. But that being said, it did happen. And so I think that's just a reminder that a lot of the heart of these problems are in fact the sort of the institutionalizing of racist systems into America as a practice. And then you add to that, Massachusetts didn't just do that, it doubled down on this racist process by not allowing cities to do what other cities around the country do, which have a multiple ways to raise revenue.
Yeah, and more progressive ways.
More progressive ways. Yeah.
The thing that also builds off what you were saying, that I often think when talking about issues around home rule, of one book that I had read a few years ago. I was looking up the author, Noam Magor, I hopefully pronouncing that correctly, the book called Brahmin Capitalism. And the book itself looks at the way in which the kind of Massachusetts business elite in the latter part of the 19th century that had previously been heavily invested in cotton in the South moved their money into Western expansion and building the railroads and all of other things. But at the same time as they were the ones financing the expansion of the country out West, they were violently opposed to any growth of the city they lived in. So that anything that would expand the scope of Boston itself, that same kind of quote unquote Boston Brahmin, were a hard no, because any growth in city infrastructure would mean more money in taxes that they have to pay. And I always end up thinking about that as well, because it speaks to, as well, as Jordan was noting about the ways in which historical inequities are baked in to these arrangements. The reason why cities and towns are so constrained in what they can do when taxing powers is because of the historical legacy of the rich people in Boston, like rich people in and around Boston, who simply don't want to pay more in taxes, were the ones who typically have outsized sway in the government and got them to make
Don't send their kids to public school anyway.
Exactly. That they viewed any attempt to invest in the public realm as an imposition on their own private wealth.
Yep. I want us to talk a little bit about because Jordan, I love something that you said earlier. You were talking about how the state has this excuse for why they don't let cities and towns have income tax or sales tax or any of those things. That you were saying that that they claim that they keep control of that, but then they dole it out. They go ahead and give it to cities in state aid.
Yeah. So just like so one of the other things that you'll note when you look at other states and how they function is that other states actually dedicate funds from federal taxes and also state income taxes directly to cities and towns. So they'll say a certain percentage automatically goes through, and Massachusetts does not do that. Massachusetts has a state aid, it has a local aid fund, which has the milieu of being fair, but is of course totally controlled and arbitrary at the whims of the speaker and the Senate president. Right. And so we could do something where we dedicate those money all the way down in such ways to have a more dedicated stream, to set some floors, maybe to have some more maybe to put in some more progressive ways that we do that sort of state aid. But instead, what we have is a system which acts as like the speaker gets to just, throw it around. And there is, again, the state aid system does have some floor. It does have some rules baked in from the general fund, but not as much as we would think. And certainly not as much as other states when you start to look at how we compare to other places, which again contributes to this problem of us over relying on property taxes as a way to fund our local municipalities. But yeah, so of course, like, the states, of course it goes back to this thing where the speaker wants control and, can dole out extra money for state aid or extra projects for the more compliant state reps and state senators, right? Of course.
Oh yeah. I mean, hopefully listeners to this particular podcast are going to check out others of our podcast if they're like, really? Oh, the Speaker of the House wants control of things. What do you mean by
I was thinking of just like going off video for a second and saying it was because I fainted at learning from my shock of learning that we do not have a fair process for doling out local aid, and it's disproportionately influenced by those in power.
Oh, the number of levers the speaker has for controlling the way that state reps vote is unbelievable, truly unbelievable.
And it's also always stunning to me, just even kind of particularly on that with local aid, is the whole system of earmarks here, beyond just the favoritism of it that gets played and how it goes, is that almost all of these things seem like they would make far more sense to be doled out by like an actual like grant process where you would actually have some needs-based assessment and a determination of where the money should go, rather than all of the money just somehow ending up in like Quincy, Weymouth, or the North End.
Quincy, I wonder why.
Right?
Yeah. I think I think I hope the listeners, what they take from this is I think it's important to remember that these systems don't have to be this way, and we could change them, and that fundamentally it's undemocratic. It's undemocratic. Like, I'm noticing again, Jonathan, I read an article that Master List wrote about your call for allowing more more local decision making for our municipalities, with again as like, oh, people want these things and progressives want these things. And I'm just like, but we don't know if people want them. What we want is for people to have a say. We want, again, the way the media frames it, they frame it the way autocrats and conservatives and sort of like the sort of rising fascism does it, which is democracy is something that's gifted to regular people from the people with power, right? The know-it people, the smart people, like we give to you a little bit of say, right? And like what we're saying is no, fundamentally, our municipality should have more ability to set the ways in which they fund their government that works for them. And one of them may be a transfer fee. One of them may be some sort of rental control and rental and some sort of like and oversight over their property in a way that makes sense and is tangible and reasonable based on the bounds of their cities, right? Like just some more control for people to have over the things. And that's really what this is what ultimately about is the lack of ability of municipalities to do the things they need to do, to pay for the things that the state should be paying for and has put down on the municipalities is the reason that we need this flexibility. And again, it's just sort of like, it's really a democracy problem.
I was going to underscore that like for democracy to have its true meaning, you need to know that when you vote, that you're voting on things actually change, like has an impact on what can be done. And that the people that you choose to vote into office can actually use the tools available to them to make the changes that they're promising that they will. And for cases like that, Massachusetts basically tries to render municipal democracy weak and ineffective. And it's kind of always jarring with like one of the latest examples of where Mayor Michelle Wu in Boston has a home rule petition to try to shift the kind of property tax burden in the city to move it more onto kind of commercial taxes away from residential property taxes. And like, I don't think I should have to care what Senate President Karen Spilka thinks about what Boston wants to do with its property tax assessment. She lives in Ashland. Mm-hmm. She should be, if it's about what Ashland is doing with its property tax assessments, I think she should have an opinion. I don't think she should have to or should about Boston's.
Absolutely. I'll just say before we end that I love it when we compare the United States to other countries. And it's like, hey, like we're not the only country in the whole world. And I love it when we compare Massachusetts to other states. Like people think that we're somehow either the same as, or as good as, or better than other states. And for sure, in the question of whether our cities are allowed to do progressive things, or if the state prevents us from doing those. We talk a lot about Republican state legislatures that prevent cities and towns from doing progressive things, and we get all upset. But like here in Massachusetts, we are just, as an absolute standard, our cities and towns are prevented from doing a lot of progressive legislation, like entire swaths of legislation around employers and employees, like minimum wage laws around, around tenants and landlords, all sorts of things that we simply can't do anything. And taxation is another one. So the ability for cities to raise their own revenue is really hampered by the state legislature. And that is not the case in other states, and other cities have other sources of revenue that they can lean on that we just do not have available to us. All right, gang, is there anything else we want to chit chat about related to city revenue before we close off for today?
The only thing I'll note, and it's something I've said in past episodes, is that whenever there's a case in another state where like a Republican governor and state legislature pass legislation to try to hamstring their like liberal capital city's ability to pass its own laws, liberals in Massachusetts are rightly appalled.
Yep.
By what the Republicans in those other states are doing. And it's always important to remember that's already the law here in Massachusetts. And so when we're offended by the things that are happening in other states as being assaults on democracy and good policymaking, we should be thinking about how do we change the existing laws that do the same here.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Thanks so much to you both. Thanks so much to our listeners. By the way, we have a link right below. You can always donate a little bit to the show. We appreciate it. We need it. It helps us get this out to as many people as we can. The thousands of folks who check in both as listeners to the podcast as well as viewers on YouTube, folks who find us on social media, viewers on TikTok, and all of those places. Thank you so much to our donors. You can become one today. And you can always forward this episode to your friends as well. And we look forward to chatting with you all next week. Hey there. Thanks so much for watching us on YouTube. Please like and subscribe. And it would be amazing if you would also subscribe to us on your favorite podcast player. Just look for Incorruptible Massachusetts wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks so much.